So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Deepali Dewan, and I'm the Dan Mishra Curator of South Asian Art and Culture at the ROM. And I'm delighted you could join us today for our Curator Conversation, a digital program that explores themes and subjects from the ROM's collections alongside industry professionals. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on what has been the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabeg Nation, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, since time immemorial to today. I personally want to acknowledge that it is the home of many Indigenous communities today. Takaranto, today also known as Toronto, is governed by Treaty 13, and that the dish with one spoon covenant applies across Turtle Island, today called North America. I recognize that these agreements are fraught, often having been formed through coercion, violence, and unequal power relations, and have been broken time and again in the name of settlement and the extraction of natural resources for profit. These legacies continue to be acted out today through our government and institutions. As a diasporic person whose life has been shaped by multiple migrations and whose sense of belonging to any one land is complex, I am committed to understanding the history that has allowed me to settle here and my responsibilities to it. These include acknowledging and thanking ancestors who cared for this land, sharing resources and being conscientious of what I use, working towards making sure the history of harm to Indigenous communities does not repeat itself, and ensuring my own journey of learning is proactive, ongoing, and evolving. My guest for today's program is Umbereen Inayet, Curator of the award-winning Wakenings Project for Toronto History Museums. Umbereen Inayet is a national award-winning TEDx speaker, curator, artistic director, and producer, and holds a master's degree in social work and an undergraduate degree in cultural anthropologies and museums and women's studies. Umbereen's work bridges pop culture and contemporary art, using her roots in anthropology, culture, psychology, and social work to inform her artistic practices. A great-granddaughter of Hafiz Jalandhari, who wrote the lyrics of the national anthem of Pakistan, she is a visual storyteller and playwright with a long list of credits for major City of Toronto events, as an artistic producer and curator of Nuit Blanche Toronto, and working on projects with artists, curators, and studios, including Ai Weiwei, Drake, Philip Beasley, House, Daniel Arsham, El Cid, and JR. So I want to welcome Umbereen.
Hello.
Hi, Umbereen. So nice to have you here. And thank you for being in this undisclosed location that is clearly not Toronto.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
Where we are having sunshine today, so that's a beautiful thing.
I know, I heard that it snowed like 2 days ago.
It did. If you look at social media, everybody has posted a snow shot from Toronto.
Honestly, I just was like, I can't. Just
well, we're happy that you're not in that space, but it's shining today. We're all good. And I'm so happy to have this conversation. I have to say that, I've followed your work for years and I'm such a fan, and I'm excited to be talking to you today. And you seem to be rethinking the nature of public art. So rather than something we just come across and say, oh, that's nice and kind of pass by, it feels like some of the work that you're doing really confronts us. It engages us, it demands our attention, and it hopefully transforms us as well. So it really feels like your work kind of is addressing, what can public art be? And so I want to start with just on a very basic level. You are the curator for the City of Toronto Museums.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you tell us what is the City of Toronto Museums and how long have you been playing this role?
Sure. Well, thank you for your intro and thank you for your kind words. I feel the same way about you. So I'm the curator and artistic director for Toronto History Museums. So museums and heritage sites that are basically from the 1800s. So very non-contemporary. It came to pass over the last 2 years. It's funny, the pandemic changed all of our lives. It changed my life a million times fold because I was working on Nuit Blanche. I did Nuit Blanche since 2008, since I was a wee social worker walking into City Hall being like, oh my God, I'm not in Scarborough anymore. I worked on all the major city events. And then during the pandemic, I was put, so there were all these cultural recovery teams that were created. You know, how are we going to get back to normal? What are we going to do for the city? How are we going to care for the city? And instead of being put on the cultural recovery team officially, which is, you know, all of the show Loves Tion, the Year of Public Art, I got put on a health and safety team. I don't know how that happened because I'm not a health and safety person at all. I was like, this is weird. But it was kismet because the woman who ran that team is Cheryl Blackman. She's very new to the city. She's been there for about 3 years. Black woman, originally from Jane and Finch, huge powerhouse visionary. And I remember it was during the pandemic and I was just feeling like everybody else, super lost, like, you know, out of control. I wasn't sure what was happening in my life. And like, literally, I'm going to tell you a little backstory. I was at my parents' house because I went home to be with my parents. I'm like, okay, when the world's ending, I need to be with my parents. And it's Tuxedo Court in Scarborough. And I was feeling so lost. And I listened to a lot of, you know, spiritual messaging and like just wisdom teachers like Ian Van Zandt and like amazing women. And I remember Oprah, when she wrote The Color Purple, when she read The Color Purple, she felt this calling that she was going to be in the film. And she believed that she was going to be an She's a manifester. And when she didn't get the call, she said that she joined this camp and she was running around on the track. And she was saying, I surrender, I surrender. So I kid you not, I literally did that. I was at my parents' house. I went outside, my parents have a track, and I ran around in the rain, it was raining. And I said, I surrender. And I go upstairs because I was like, what in the hell is going on? You know, why am I on this health and safety team? Why am I not on cultural recovery? This is so confusing. I was running around, I go upstairs, I sit down and I get this call from Cheryl. And she said, listen, I've heard a lot about you. And I was like, oh no, because I tend to push a lot of boundaries. I was like, what did you hear? She's like, you're a visionary and I want you to come to my department. And I represent all of museums and heritage. And I was like, oh, wow. And I said to her, are you sure? Because I tend to really blow things up. And she said, no, I want that. I need that. Bring all of your full self to my department. And that was it. And so it's all the 10 heritage sites in Toronto. So it really is Canadian colonial history, like where parts of the War of 1812 was fought, which is Fort York, 19-acre site. I mean, there's bones underneath that. There's graveyards back there. It's very colonial. There's a lot of erasure happening. Scarborough Museum, Gibson House, you know, and Montgomery's Inn and Colburn Lodge, and massive, you know, sites all across the GTA. And I would honestly say if it wasn't for 2020 and all of the truths that came forward, you know, after the murder of George Floyd and all of these awakenings that took place, I don't think I would have been interested. But because it's almost like the Earth's surface cracked open, I like grabbed hold of that and I was like, you know what? I'm going to hold these colonial stories and I'm going to turn them around and we're all going to do something about this as we move forward. And so I created Awakenings, basically from everything the world was going through. You know, I was going through a lot. Like I was going through a paradigm shift, burnout, all sorts of things, fear, you know, and I'm sure the world was too. And I remember I was doing a session, I'm just going to tell you everything, with an energy healer that I was seeing. And she was getting me to visualize that I was walking through a forest. So I'm lying there in Tuxedo Court in the hood, visualizing me walking through a forest. And she's like, what do you see? And I said, I don't know, I just see glass. She's like, pick up the glass and throw it out. Pick up the glass and throw it out. So I literally visualized in my mind, glass being thrown out, glass being thrown out, glass being thrown out. And then when I got the call from Cheryl, which was like the next day, I remember saying to this woman, you know, I think something's coming. And she was like, just pick up the glass and throw it out. So when Cheryl called me and she was like, do this, I sat down and the first word that came to my mind was awakening. And it was like this idea of this shard, this glass, this looking glass that we all need to hold space for, and then we need to take up those broken pieces and we need to throw them out and we need to create a new. And so it really came out of consciousness. And I was like, we can't, as the city, not hold space for what's going on in the world. Like, everybody's going through serious fear, grief, vulnerability. We're in a state of emergency. All of these truths are coming forward. There's protests happening. There's, that's when it was before the Indigenous Brave started coming out. Like, I said, you cannot, as a city, not hold space for this. We need to be the leaders. We need to care for our people, and we need to be responsible. And so Awakenings to me was that responsibility and saying, we're not going to turn a blind eye to this. And what I decided was that I was going to use these colonial sites as places for people to respond to. I don't do reenactments, respond to, so that, the way you process grief is that you hold space for it and then you acknowledge it. And then after you create rituals to really bring in the new, that's how you move forward. So long story short, that's how I created Awakenings. And I was like, this is a paradigm shift in consciousness that we are never going to go back from. And all of these colonial sites is basically what we're going to use as the basis for healing. So I spent 6 months just working with all of the staff, finding out stories of erasure. I was like, tell me anything and everything about people of color. Tell me about Black folks, tell me about Indigenous people, tell me about differently abled bodies, tell me about queer narratives, tell me about stuff that you don't normally talk about. And a lot of staff are amazing and they do talk about it and they have that knowledge, but it wasn't the meta narrative that was being told. So I literally immersed myself in all of the things that we needed to hold space for. And I decided that even if I didn't get a story, I was going to create a space and invite artists and creatives of color to create their own stories, because that's how we were going to change the narrative moving forward.
Yeah, it's, I think that your story, your pandemic story resonates a lot with people. I think that a lot of us have gone through a version of that. And it's amazing that you came into this role during the pandemic and were, confronted with these colonial spaces and, some of the sites that you were mentioning as part of the City of Toronto museums. A lot of those include those heritage houses, right? That are often in the neighborhoods that we live in, but have these kind of colonial pasts. And, I'm not sure how many people have gone there, but, are they spaces that are open? Are they welcoming? What kind of histories do they tell? And to think about what other kind of histories that they tell seems to me really the crux of the project. And I should just say that, in fact, Cheryl Blackman played an important role at the ROM, was at the ROM for many years before she went to City of Toronto museums and was able to reconceptualize them. So let's just talk specifically about Awakenings. And I think everybody can see some of the images on the screen that have been part of this project. So you've described Awakenings as a movement, but what exactly is it?
So it's a creative platform that allows for interventions to take place across the sites. And that's a virtual platform, that's a physical platform, that's an educational platform, but most importantly, it's a mindset. The intention is so forward and clear. It's anti-colonial, it's anti-racist, it's anti-oppressive. That is the intention. The goal of it is behavior change. That's the goal. What I'm hoping to do is to create an awakening inside of all of us that calls for us to never be the same. So when you see my works, I want you to think about it. I want you to think about the person. I want you to think about the history. I want you to think about how come you didn't know about that story. And then I want you to go and do something about it. And so it's an internal awakening that is for humanity. It's for each other. And then on the flip side, it's also for yourself. It's about self-awareness. And so when you see my projects, like this one, for example, Marianne Shad, I'm addressing so many things. One is erasure. Ain't nobody know about Marianne Shad unless you're in that space. She was this amazing Black woman, first female publisher of Canada. She was the first female lawyer. And she published a newspaper called the Provincial Freeman, which was advocating for the abolishment of enslavement and talking about how to help enslaved people from the States get to Toronto. And she was from the States, and she had come here after the Fugitive Slave Act as an asylum seeker. And there's a replica of her printer inside of that museum, which is Mckenzie House, which is home to the first mayor. So I was like, hold on a minute. No one knows the story. One. Two, how am I going to honor her in a way that is reverential? Because we need to see people of color in reverential ways now. This is not just about, hey, we need to tell people stories. No, it's paradigm shift. It's a shift of the gaze. She's looking at you. And then I called Young Yemi. So I'm bringing in creatives from Toronto and around the world to help reimagine. And Young Yemi is some of the best in the game. I purposely called him because I wanted him to recreate her image in a reverential way. She looks like a damn queen, on that surface. And then I did an intervention on a historical site. They were like, you're mad. I was like, no, don't worry. We will do this. Because of my experience with Nuit Blanche, I've done all kinds of crazy things. And when I did the piece before that was shown with the eye on the wall, we already had done that at Campbell House where we put vinyl on this exterior brick surface. So I was like, I want her space to be on this site. So you cannot unsee her ever again. And also you want to learn about the museum, you want to go in there, you want to get a copy of her paper that exists. And she wasn't even able to sign her name. So those little florals that you see underneath her necklace, that was the emblem she used to sign her name because she was risking her life. So this is the type of I want people to dig deep. I want people to unearth these stories. And, I was on Global News after this and they were like, how come we don't know her story? And I said, well, that's what erasure is. That's exactly what erasure is. You're not meant to know these stories. And so this is the type of stuff that I'm trying to do. And that's all the layers that are built into just one thing alone. And what I will say is this image caused a ruckus. We got so many messages from so many people. I think 30,000 of them, were coming in. And I got messages from her family, literally saying, that's my great aunt, that's my great grandfather, that's my, that's my bloodline. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And so the pride that I think people feel when they walk by this is that I matter. And that's the type of energy that I want to create. I want people to know they matter. And we all need to stop and ask why we haven't heard of these stories and advocate for change. And for example, my partner with the Toronto Raptors, the first thing they were saying is we want to change curriculum. So an image like this at this site on this scale with this narrative done in Young Yemi's beautiful way literally caused, John Tory, our wonderful mayor, and John Wiggins, the VP of Equity at the Raptors, showing up to say, how can we support? So that's the intention.
And so just to be clear, so this is the physical structure we see is Mckenzie House, which is one of the heritage homes in the City of Toronto museums. And this is a large painted mural or vinyl on the brick surface
exactly.
of the house. And people can go and see it still today, Umbereen?
No, they can't. So it was up for about 4 or 5 months, but because it's heritage brick, we had to take it down for the winter.
Okay.
But yeah, the point was that you could go inside and see it. It's a 30-foot mural and go and get a copy of her newspaper, which still exists. So this site is open for everyone to go to. The curators are amazing. The site staff will walk you through. You'll see the replica of her printer and you can actually get a copy of her newspaper.
Okay.
So Awakenings, these are artistic interventions with all these extra layers tapped in, and it's like a call to action. Please go get that paper and be like, damn, how come I didn't know about this one?
Well, I came across, it seems like a lot of the Awakenings projects are archived on YouTube, and there's a whole set of videos that interview, that have the artists speaking, but also telling the stories. And it seems like the Awakenings interventions really range between these kinds of large scale murals to film work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so during a pandemic, the one thing you could do is shoot films. And so I shot so many films. I didn't even know how I became a commissioner of films, but at the end of the day, it's still public art, it's storytelling, it's narrative. And so what we did was right out of the gate, I brought in my dear friend, Director X, to come in and provide mentorship to 10 emerging artists who I gave those truths to. So when I spent 6 months, digging through those erased stories, I gave them to creatives of color to respond to. And so we actually interviewed about 30 artists. And the ones we picked were the ones that had a very strong, and they were all wonderful, but the ones we picked had a very strong agenda in the consciousness and truths they wanted to bring out. So some of them would say, I'm a Black queer woman. It's very important to me to tell a queer story. I'm, half Indigenous, half Afro-Latin. Very important for me to talk about how my culture was discussed at home as with racial slurs. And so we went through all of that and we made films. So we went in during the pandemic, all the sites were shut down and the artists ran around the house and the teams were amazing. They were so excited to bring people in and shoot these films. What I do with everything is accompany it with reflections. So I want to hear the artists speak from their own words on their intention. I'm very, very clear on what's your intention. Yes, the process, I want to learn, about their genius, but the accompanying reflections are meant for people to have that takeaway in their pocket so they can be like, oh, I'm not hiding behind walls of academia. It's like, hey, what did you mean when you said this? Very clear language, following, oral histories, narrative, wisdom, traditions, to hear from the artists' mouth themselves and why they did what they did and how we all can learn from where they're coming from. Because I want Awakenings to be situated in the present. So it's like current day conversation so we can reimagine our futures while reflecting on the past.
Well, one of the ones that, I hope we didn't lose Umbereen. I'll just say that one of the ones that really stuck out to me was the film Reverence by Tona Gray. That was done, I don't know.
Tiana Gray.
Yeah, that was, talking about sort of excavating the archives and finding those erased stories, that, we aren't really part of our curriculum, certainly, and not part of the popular conversation, but that was a film that was about an anti-slavery convention that happened in Toronto the year after the Fugitive Slave Act was introduced. And, it just struck me as, and the question that she asks in that film is not just about, that convention was about asking about how do we protect Black people from this Fugitive Slave Act in the 19th century. The question that she was also asking was how do we continue to protect Black people today, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, in the present of police violence against Black communities. And that was one that really struck me as a film that was produced in one of the heritage houses.
That was a wonderful, perfect example of what we're trying to do with these films, is to basically use them as tools for education. Because when you're dealing with erasure, storytelling through film is a wonderful idea to reimagine what happened. And so she's telling her perspective of how that's why in the beginning we hear that ring, ring, ring. That's an actual call when she was calling in to learn about this anti-slavery convention. And what's lovely is that Marianne Shad was at that convention. Henry Bibb was at that convention, and 30,000 enslaved people came to Canada post that convention at this site. So she's telling her perspective that she's trying to find this info, which is not readily available. That's one. Two, you see her camera panning in the space and you see all the former mayors. There's no Black people there. And so that's why she positions herself. And one of those people is her father that she puts in front of those images. Be like, why aren't we holding these people in reference? And then you have the amazing, beautiful contemporary dancer, Sam, and you see him performing. And so one of the things that you'll constantly see in our Awakenings film is dance, because dance represents freedom. And so when you have not felt seen or heard, the number one thing you want to do, and I encourage people to do, is take up space. Take up space. And so that dancer went into that space. He'd never been there before. He'd never heard of this history. And he said something just overcame him. And he just started to perform. Like he was in a trance. Like it was just phenomenal. And I was like, yes, you know, and then we had the reflection, and now those films are, you know, going to Toronto District School Board. But what I love is that there's healing there, like him performing like that, her making that film, like they walked up going, I don't know what happened. And then people watching that and seeing Black bodies in that space, there's a healing that happens. That's what's so key about this filmmaking process is I'm encouraging people to like really hopefully get some catharsis from being here.
There was an image up that said, "Oh, Canada." Maybe we can put that one back up, and could you talk about that?
Sure. So I love, you know, graffiti. I love tags. I love this idea of like, you know, you wake up in the morning and again, there's this intervention. I love Banksy, you know, these political disruptors. And actually, if I were to be honest, I saw a Raptors logo that was put up, you know, by the condos by Fort York a couple of months ago, or I don't know, 2 years ago. And I clocked that image. I was like, this is really cool. And so, you know, I kind of just clock things in my mind for later. And so what I wanted to do is, this is part of changing what we remember. So Awakenings gets launched on different calendar dates, you know, like for example, August for Emancipation Month. Nobody really talks about that. We have huge projects that come out then. This was during Remembrance Month is what I'm calling it. Because of course we have Remembrance Day, which we need to have, which is November 11th. But then there's Indigenous Veterans Remembrance Day. And we don't necessarily, you know, make space for that. And so what I wanted to do was do this intervention overnight that A, landed on Indigenous Veterans Day, B, was in Fort York, which is like the battle that was, you know, fought between Canada and the US for their freedom, but also represents the battle that continues to be fought today under, you know, on the guise of people of color. And C, I wanted to address the graves. And so I brought in this amazing artist, Jay Soul. He is a graffiti artist. He's very, very, very bold with his messaging. And I just said, hey man, I want to do this thing. It's pretty wild, Banksy style. I want to do this overnight. And I wanted to pop up the next day at the fort. And he was like, 100 million gajillion%, I'm in. And so this is the piece, you know, that we did. And we did it overnight. This is his hand-drawn image. And it's about 60 by 80 feet. It took us
this
like—
This is painted on what looks like grass?
Yeah, it's painted on grass at Fort York. So we stenciled it out using his image. And then we brought in people to paint them. And he, the artist, was there and oversaw the work with us all night. And we actually slept over in the fort to get this image. Because we had thought, okay, you know what, we'll put some lights on and we'll grab it, the image at night. But it was like 4 a.m. and it was too dark. And so I was like, are you up for sleeping over? And everyone said, yeah. So we slept in the barracks, me, the artist, and our production team. I literally had 2 chairs. I put myself across the chairs. The artist slept on a bunch of IKEA bags because of the other piece we did with Krista Kim. I bought 200 blankets for the public. He slept on those bags. Our production person just slept on the floor. Our documentarian slept on the floor. Our production guy slept in his car. So it was like 5 of us. We set our alarms for 6:30. We went out and we took the image. And so for me, what was really important, I was like, I don't care if people come in the venue or not. It's an act of solidarity and we're doing it. It's to show that we're holding space, we're being responsible. We're saying, you know, Canada has this horrifying past. We're showing up on a day that people don't know about and we're doing it anyways. And then the next day, we're all over the news. And it was like, I want people, I understand we live in a viral world. Images travel. And during a pandemic, you can't rely on people coming in or not, because of course we have to follow health and safety regulations. And the other thing that I will say, I'm trying to change the metric of success. We're in the art world, you know, in institutions, it's how many bodies came to see it. How many impressions did you have? That's what gets you grants. That's what gets, you know, you let that. That's how success is measured, especially when I worked on Nuit Blanche, 1.2 million, 1.2 million. Like we heard that figure 40 million times. The thing about Awakenings is we don't care. We are doing it And the point is that we are acting in solidarity. We're doing the right thing, and that is the measure of success. And so that's why I love this work. I mean, A, it's phenomenal, but B, and Cheryl, bless her heart and bless all the museum staff, everybody understood the why. And it wasn't about how many bodies came to see it. It was the fact that we did it. And we did it on such a big scale. We're like, we're not playing here. We are going to acknowledge this. And so, thankfully, we got a really positive response, especially from, our Indigenous community. And the artist said, I've never been invited into a museum before. This is my biggest show. And I was like, I got you, man. So
well,
he was,
I'm struck by how for you, the process is not only just creating the work, but documenting it, putting it out there, letting it circulate. And so it's like creating creating a new archive of those stories that either are unknown or erased or hidden in the current archives.
Yeah, we do live in a viral world. And during the pandemic, everybody was on their phones. So I know culture is being passed through phones. And so that became my primary mode. I said, every single thing we do has to be able to be viewed on your phone. And so literally, I have a documentarian who's amazing, Andrew Williamson, like, he slept in the fort. I was like, dude, you ain't leaving, and he does everything with us. And not only that, I get the content right away, because you can't sleep on things. Like, A, we're living in a 30-second span of attention world, but B, I want the message to travel through images. It is a new form of, it's an extension of an existing civil rights movement. And we saw it with the Black Square, right? We saw it with the Orange Square. This is how I think of awakenings, pass the image around. And I'm hoping that will create a movement amongst everything else.
I guess it's making me think also about, like, rethinking about this notion of public art, which we often think of as something physical in the space, in a public space that we might come across, on our way walking down the street or to the store. But I think what you're talking about is a completely different notion of public art.
Yeah, I think of public art as consciousness. Honestly, it's conscious. You are public art. That's how I view it now. Bodies, people, humanity. When you walk through space, your mind is a part of public art for me. That's how I look at it. So every single thing I do, I know you as a human is an extension of what I just did. So I better be doing something that's going to impact the public, and it's going to elicit behavioral change to create a better society. So I don't look at a thing anymore, especially during the pandemic. I had to learn. I had to start making films because that's what we could do. I had to move into technology. Like, I was doing AR monuments right away. I was like, great. So in order to show solidarity, this is another way to do it. And for me, it's become a form of consciousness. That to me is now public art.
Yeah. I remember when we were talking, just prepping for today's event, you were talking about kind of the notion of public art as wearable in some ways. It's like portable. You take it with you. It comes 100%. To you rather than you have to go to it.
100%. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. And I really think of everything as an extension of that. I work with brands. I work with H&M for years. I work with the Toronto Raptors. I work with people who know that they are a lifestyle brand. And I do that on purpose because I'm trying to create a conscious society, right? So if you're going to purchase something to put on your body, why not have messaging woven into that? And that also involves things like your mood, your joy, your happiness. I'm trying to make public art a movement and a lifestyle. So all of it creates a more soulful, self-aware society that holds space for each other, no matter what that looks like. So it's 360 for me. It's music. I've commissioned music. Cardinale did this amazing song called Freedom Heights. We took the story of Joshua Glover and he wrote it into, hey, did you know this is a story of an enslaved man who found freedom and worked at Montgomery's Inn? But the fight is still continuing today. And so I gave it to the Raptors. The Raptors took that and now it's part of what they play. So that is public art. And so I really see it as a 360-degree embodiment, especially post-pandemic. Like, I don't have time to waste, and just this is a thing to ooh and ah at. How is that going to make your life better and people around you life better?
So we just saw another one of those interventions in the image with the CN Tower. Do you want to quickly talk about that and then tell us what's coming next in Awakenings?
Sure. So that's Global Rainbow. That's a piece we did with Nuit Blanche. I still work on Nuit Blanche, but now I do it at the fort. But back then we were in Chinatown with an amazing curator. So it's not my piece, but I produced this piece. She brought this artist on, Yvette Matern, and I was the one who was like, dude, let's shoot it at the CN Tower. And my production partner, Joe, who manages Your Public Art, he just shook his head like, oh God, here she goes again. But he said, okay, I often play dumb. That's my whole strategy in life. I'm like, why would they not want to do? So we called the CN, right? We called the CN Tower. They loved the messaging and they said yes. And so this is shot from Chinatown. There's these huge lasers, like lasers that they use at Coachella. I'm pretty sure it was Jay-Z's, production company that did his lasers. Joe was like, don't touch it, your finger's gonna come off. But the idea was that it was sending this message of unity and love from the rooftop in Chinatown. And we actually had to work with bird activists, to make sure that they were done in a way that birds didn't get harmed. We had to work with the airport to make sure that they were comfortable with us, doing this crazy thing. And we did it. And it all just came from, me going, well, why not? And it was really beautiful to see people looking up in the sky and just walking together towards this icon, in unity, like unity and as a community. And it's just, the intervention was so big. I looked around and I just saw everyone's look of wonder in their face and all walking in unison. I was like, this is amazing. So yeah, that was one of probably the craziest things we did, but it was a blast.
Well, I love how you're thinking outside the box. I love how you're going big, and it feels like Awakenings is something that, might happen, at these particular moments and particular sites, but it's an archive that you're creating that kind of is snowballing and can be still found. It's sort of like each of those projects are still going on, but just in a different form.
Yeah, it's a movement. It's 100% a movement. When you hear the word Awakenings, I made it. Sorry, there's a little mosquito. I wanted to make something for everybody. You are just as important, no matter what color, no matter what, walk of life you've had. I'm trying to say you are important. Your story is important. You are worthy. And so the Awakening holds space for every single person. And I'm hoping that when you hear the word, you see the pieces, you want to join the movement, and where you actually look at each other and go, how are you? That's the whole point. And the work is temporary, right? It comes and goes. I've been working on Nuit Blanche for 13 years, overnight 12-hour event. It's the memories. And the intention is so in your face. It's meant to be that way because I'm trying to elicit a new consciousness for humanity that hopefully can become a global movement, right? Because every city has an awakening, everybody. This is something that's not about me. It's about what's happening in Colombia, what's happening in Tokyo, what's happening around the world that you need to hold space for so you can have an awakening too and become a conscious society, and all of us can be better for it. Because that's one thing that I was watching during the pandemic. You turn on the news and you're like, Barcelona's doing this for the vaccine and like Tokyo's doing this. And I was like, why don't we do that for humanity? I literally was like, why can't that be what we just do? We're going to address gun violence. We're going to address racism. We're going to address together. So I was like, I'm just going to do it. So that was the point. And what I'm doing next, I'm really excited about our Nuit Blanche that's happening at Fort York. Girl, I'm so excited about the artists I'm bringing in. Huge intervention. Like I get tears thinking about it.
So when is that? And
that's October 3rd, I want to say. We have a huge program coming out for Emancipation Month. Major Canadian artists. We're going to be, I can't give away too much, but taking over one of the museum sites where a new story is being told, like literally taking colonial portraits off the walls. And, you're going to experience a new aristocracy per se. Tons of interventions. We're going to have a new mentorship. So every year we launch a mentorship. A new one's going to be coming out in June. Again, like we're going to be doing stuff for Remembrance Month, and then Truth and Reconciliation. I'll be dropping a new project. So there'll be stuff, coming along. And the thing about the YouTube is that it's always there. So people can always go. And I did a children's project, which is called It's Been a While with Mammalian Diving Reflex. So if people even want to listen to children's voices, we brought them in and we recorded their responses. It's just amazing. So I want to be able to provide stuff on an ongoing basis. And this is the way I'm decolonizing museums, or trying to, is to change the voices and the people that you see and hear, so that even if you're not physically there, you can close your eyes and visualize, a West Indian child there going, hey, she looks like she's badass. How come I don't know about her? How come this woman can't sign her painting? I would not like that if my sister couldn't sign her painting. Just so that stuff's going to keep continuing as well. And yeah, I'm just going to keep going as much as I can. And our partners are awesome. And the museum sites are great. And they're going to be doing their own stuff. And hopefully it just grows and grows and grows.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating to hear more about this Awakenings project, and I can absolutely see it growing and growing for a long time. And I totally get how even these one intervention at a time changes behavior, enough that, it builds and builds to something that is a movement. We're going to just turn to questions for the next few minutes before we close, and I'm just going to see what we have going on in our Q&A. So Umbereen, there is a couple of questions here. So there's a question from Amanda. She asks, are there any installations that you wanted to have completed, but for one reason or another didn't happen?
Good
or
question.
Hasn't happened?
Let me think. I'm pretty, stubborn. So I would say no, but I will say there's installations that I wish more people had seen and could stay up longer. So Krista Kim's Continuum, 100%.
Yeah.
Like that artwork blew all of our minds. Like 100-foot LED screen that has to do with light and sound frequencies that we put in the fort against the natural original shorelines that was erased from indigenous
okay, so that's
mapping.
the one here.
Yeah, we brought in Jeff Schroeder from the Smashing Pumpkins. We had a 5 a.m. morning meditation. Like this piece, I felt could have changed lives. Like I saw, what's so interesting? I saw so many men there sitting alone with their eyes closed and open, just meditating on this work. And this is the one piece that I was like, I just wish, I could have kept it back on or bring it back.
And that's interesting. I didn't see this one in person, but I saw it on social media. Like I saw the images were circulating. So it's like the many lives that the interventions have, I think is something to take note of and take seriously in terms of, this idea of the movement. Awesome. There's another question here. Akil Virani says, it's definitely hard to quantify behavioral change and establish impact and causation on such a large scale. So are you trusting that following your ethics and doing the right thing will create the world that you want? What's more important today, optimism or strategy?
I think both. You have to be a bold visionary in order to create change, right? So agreed, it's hard to quantify behavioral change. But, chatter on socials, you can see impressions, you can see, and to be honest, I truly believe if you change one person's life, they're going to affect other people's lives. And so I think it's both. Like I have to be an optimistic, bold and brave visionary to believe that this change is possible. And we're in year 3. And what's amazing about Cheryl, she's adopted this forever. So even when I'm gone, Awakenings will continue, hoping that it becomes this new movement. So I would say like all of the above. It's still whether, you still have to do it. Like I'm still going to do it and continue to advocate for this new world, even if I don't get around to finish seeing it all.
A couple quick short questions. Jacqueline asks, what's your budget?
I know, I saw that. I was like, it's never enough. I mean,
that's always the big question. How do you get it done?
Enough. A lot of it is done based on passion. Like, you know, there's so many people that are bought into the Renaissance. Like, I've been calling people saying, listen, you know, I don't have a lot, but I have this vision to create a new Renaissance for the city. Are you in? Yes. So people like Cardinal Official, Director Ads, Krista Kim, the Toronto Raptors, all of these people are coming on because they care.
Yeah.
It's not for,
so it's really a case by case,
not for
right?
the budget. It's totally case by case. Thank
you
God
don't
we
have a budget
some,
and you work within it. You dream big and then you find it.
Yeah, exactly. We have some base funding and we have the rappers that have come on to partner up with us, but like 90% of it is people doing it because they love it. And everyone is obviously getting paid, but there could definitely be more because Awakenings is new, right? We're like a tiny, I call us a startup at the city that's taken off. So we're definitely a startup.
So Carol asks, where can people find out more about upcoming events?
So Toronto History Museums. So the city of Toronto, I think it's toronto.ca/THM. It's, if you just even Google Toronto History Museums, it'll show up.
Okay. And then if you follow City of Toronto Museums, you can also find out about stuff?
Yeah, so on their socials, Toronto History Museums on Instagram, there's the website, but our major launches are during key calendar days. So we have May for Museums Month, we have Pride, we have Emancipation, Truth and Reconciliation, Nuit Blanche, Remembrance Month. So Black History Month starts it. So that's how we sort of organize our calendar. So it's always around Pride, key things that we want to signify.
So what would that be, like 5 or 6 projects per year?
I think I do about, I don't even know, 20, but yeah, it's about 2 to 3 major ones per calendar month of significance.
Each month. Okay.
Yeah,
and
it's
then,
a lot.
And then finally, you know, Erica asks, you work with so many artists with huge influence. How did your network become so extensive? And maybe I'll temper that with, actually, I've noticed that in some ways you work with both artists who are quite well recognized and those who are still emerging too. And I think that's one of the things that makes the program so strong. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So thank you. 100%. I like to do both. I definitely love to work with emerging creatives, mid-career creatives, and, you know, established creatives, because I just feel like we're all one community. How did I do it? Trust, you know, having an unstoppable belief in, you know, how good society can be, how we can be the change. So just coming as my full self, being like, hey, this is me. There's no other walls or like, you know, this is my story. This is who I am. This is my vision. I've always been very clear about my vision. Anytime I meet anybody, if you want to partner with me, this is my intention. So there's no, you know, like, I don't like it when, you know, you're taking people for a ride. I don't do that. I'm so clear in being like, I love what you do. This is the thing I have. This is the vision I have. This is what I think it would be good for you. How do you feel? And most people are like, yeah. And what I try to do, which I think it's unique, I try and pair people that you wouldn't normally see together. Because I also try and break down these silos to be like, why can't we have the Raptors? Why can't we have Krista Kim at the fore talking about wellness with Jeff Schroeder? Why can't we have, you know, like Alcide? Why can't we have Philip Beasley and Hailey? Hailey works with The Weeknd. Why not? And so I think because of my social work background, I just see souls and people and personalities, and I try and pair them. And 99% of people love working with people that you never thought they would. So I feel like that message spreads too, that I don't put people in boxes and I welcome collaborations. And it just comes from being authentic and building trust, to be honest, like having integrity. Like, I have your back when you're not in the room. And I try and always have that. And I try and protect people like, hey, we're the city, but I got you. Like, I'm going to help you navigate this. We're going to figure this out. Yeah, this part's annoying. How are we going to get through it? How do you want to position yourself? What, you know, so I try and take away all the, what I would call it, and be a like stand-up person when that person's not there.